Hi, I'm Brandon Bowers, pastor of New Life Church, located in Locust, North Carolina. And I wanted to say thanks for stopping by and checking out our YouTube channel. I hope that today's message is both encouraging and challenging to you and your walk with Christ. If you're in our area sometime, we would love to have you come check out one of our services, each and every Sunday at 8:45, 10:15, and 11:45. We'd love to have you come out. And I hope that you enjoy today's message.
Well, good morning. So every household has its own set of rules. Most rules, they're meant to keep order, where some rules just get passed down from generation to generation. You know, it's just the way it is. That's the way my mom and dad always did it. That's the way their mom and dad did it. That's the way we're going to do it. It's just the way it is. Well, why? Well, that's just what we're used to. It's sort of a tradition kind of thing. You don't know why it's a rule. It just is, right? So don't even question it. But everybody has rules. And so over the past few weeks on our social media, we were asking the question, what rules do you remember that were a part of your house growing up? Maybe some rules that you have a part of your household now. And man, we sort of got flooded with answers. People just giving us all sorts of different answers from, way back when to present day. But I picked out a few that came in through our Facebook page, and these are interesting. I always pick out the funny stuff, so these are cool. I'm going to share about 3 of them with you. One that came in, Vicky, on our Facebook page, she said, the rule was that us kids could start going barefoot the day after Easter. The weather didn't matter. Rain, snow, sunny, warm, no bare feet until the day after Easter. Now, I mean, that's all well and good, if you're living in Florida, but, here we still get some frost like around April, so you just never know. You might want to be careful with that one. Keith, he chimed in and he said, no passing gas at the table. Like, even today, that's a rule. Don't do that, right? I love that one. And then Jennifer, this one is great. She said, Mommy's claustrophobic. So don't ever follow her into a closet where she can't get out or you might get hurt. Love that, right? We all have rules. And last week, I just appreciate everybody honoring the staff and the pastors here. And so as a way to let you get to know them a little bit, I went around and asked them, what are some rules that are a part of your house or that you remember having to go by when you were growing up? And so I started with Elizabeth. She's our kids' life director, and she's a little OCD. Just if you've ever met her, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And a rule that is in her house to this day is don't walk on the lines after I've vacuumed the carpet. Like, she's serious about that too. Elizabeth don't play. And her husband, like he totally understands, but he said, I remember growing up, Mom's rule was always don't jump on the bed because you'll break the springs. Now, never mind falling off the bed, breaking your neck. Man, don't even worry about that. Just make sure you don't break the springs, okay? Eric Sasser, he helps us out of one of our volunteers with life groups and stuff like that. And his family, they had tons and tons of rules that they sent in. But one of them in particular was no kids in mom and dad's bed. I'm like, you know what I'm talking about, right? The funny thing is, his youngest is in high school and his other's in college, so that'd just be a little weird, right, even if they were in the bed, right? No kids in the bed. Tony, I don't even know why anybody wants to live with Tony. I'll just be straight up. He got so many rules, like he can't even keep track of them. But he said, listen, if you take out the trash, you go to the trash and it's full, you just volunteered. Take it out, replace it with a bag. I can see that. But then he just kept coming. Oh yeah, here's another rule. Everybody in my house, doesn't matter what your age is, in by 10 o'clock. And I thought, well, that was pretty cool, because I like to go to bed at 9. I might negotiate before 10. Can I come in a little early, right? But then he said, seriously though, he said back when Sarah was taking classes and still working and, juggling both, and if you do that, you know how difficult that is. It was like a big rule in their house. No bothering mom while she's studying. Sarah, I guess she get a little cranky when she's trying to study. But that's understandable. But he just had tons and tons of rules. I had to cut them off. Brittany, who's in charge of all of our graphic design, social media, and all the communications, that stuff, she had a rule. I don't think she really wanted me to know about it, but I got a way of finding out stuff. Like, I know things. I know people who know people, right? And her rule to this day is don't smear poop on the wall. Now, you will understand that a little more when you realize that she has 2 small children. I think both in diapers, but I think that's more for Joe, her husband. He can get a little messy sometimes. Yeah. Don't smear poop on the walls. Evan, who's our worship leader, he said when he was growing up, living with mom and dad, and this is like what he loves about living on his own now. He's like, man, I can just go in. It doesn't matter what time of night it is. I can just cook whatever I want, stink up the apartment. It doesn't matter. Because it's like a big deal for his dad. He said his dad would come home, and the rule was, don't be stinking up the house with your cooking. You know, frying your fish and frying chicken at all hours of the night. Don't be doing that. And then he sort of impersonated his dad, whose name is Joe as well. And so I hope that, Joe, you're going to be watching this video next week because I was supposed to demonstrate. He's like, Dad would always come in. What you doing stinking up the house? You know? Who you think you are, Gordon Ramsay? Right? And that was Evan's impersonation. Right? It's not me. I'm just a translator. But then Trey, who's our in motion, our student pastor, he said his mom, her rule was always no running around, no roughhousing inside. If you're caught doing it, she's going to send you running laps outside, like around the house until she says you've had enough. I mean, that's like, she's serious. And they lived in the mountains, so it's like uphill both ways, you know? And then there's me. There's my house. Growing up, I remember one of my dad's rules was you always have to dry down the shower walls after you get out. Hated that rule. I thought, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But listen, if you've ever had to clean the shower walls where they've been hard water and, soap's coming out, you ladies, y'all know what I'm talking about. You'd appreciate it if somebody would dry down, wipe down the walls. But I hated it, but, I abide by the rules. But now, now that I have my own house, Jessica might disagree with me, we don't really have a lot of rules, not that I think are outside the norm or the ordinary. Well, I'm a little quirky, but, not like rules, but we do have a few that are for our girls, a couple of them that we really hold to, and both she and I agree on. One, no TVs in the girls' rooms. We don't. Now, Elin, the oldest, she's 5, and Ella is almost 2. She doesn't care if TV's on anyway, but no TV in the girls' rooms. We just figure, if you want to watch something on TV, then it should be something that everybody can watch. And that's why we watch Fox News, because we like what Daddy likes. Right? We just watch that. So everybody's happy, right? The other one that applies to our girls is no closing doors. You can go and play in your room all you want to, all day if you want to, but don't shut the door behind you. We just sort of figure, hey, if the door's closed and you're probably doing something on the other side of it that you don't want us to know about, keep it open. That's the rule. But then, like, the biggest rule in my house, like, I put my foot down. I say, we're going to do it this way. This is my house, right? Absolutely no compromise here. There's no debate and argument. No putting up a Christmas tree until after Thanksgiving. We don't skip holidays in my house. Boy, look at that. Hey, man, this is a spirit-filled church this morning, right? I'm just serious about it, right? And, hey, day after Christmas, that baby's coming down. All right, we're moving on. But seriously, though, I mean, rules, they're important. Everywhere you turn in life, there's rules. Rules that have to be obeyed. In the house, it's no different. Household rules are extremely important. And I know, you think back, or if you're still living at home, you think mom and dad's rules, man, they're just dumb. They're unfair. They're just trying to be mean. When I get my own place, I get my own house, I'm going to have different rules. We're going to do things my way. I ain't going to do the same thing that they did, and that's fine. Listen, when you move out, you do whatever you want to do. Have all the rules you want. Have as little rules as you want. You can be different. That's great. But you're going to quickly discover that a household without rules, not an option. Just won't work. A household with no rules is only going to result in chaos and confusion and conflict. Way more conflict than there is right now over the rules that you don't like and that you wish were different. They're absolutely necessary. And so today what we're going to talk about in week 5 of this series, Colossal, we've been studying through the book of Colossians. We're going to talk about how to have a colossal family, a colossal household. And we've sort of been, using that term colossal a little loosely Because literally it means, big, ginormous, that kind of thing. We sort of put a little twist on the term colossal to really mean, great, fulfilling, abundant, and in a spiritual way, God-honoring and purpose-filled. So that's the kind of household, that's the kind of family dynamic that we want to find. Not just a good household. We don't want just a great family dynamic. We want a colossal house. And so how do we do that? How do we create an environment where everyone living there thrives? They thrive instead of, just looking for a way out. Can't wait to get out from under the house. How do we create that environment? And generally speaking, it is to create an environment, to create a family, a house, a home where Christ is supreme, where Christ is at the center, where He rules and reigns. You remember back at the first week, I talked about Jesus as the colossal Savior. And I said then that, in my opinion, chapter 1, verse 18 is the theme of the book of Colossians. And it says that He, talking about Jesus, that He might have the supremacy in everything. In everything. In our life, in our jobs, in our homes, in our marriage, in our relationships. That He might have the supremacy. So what we need to understand is that unless Jesus has the supremacy in the home, in the marriage, in the child training and development, we won't achieve the colossal family. We'll always be missing something. Unless Jesus has total domination, we're always going to come up short and we'll never fully experience the family on a level that God really intended it to be. And so that's easy to say, but much harder to do. I mean, anybody could stand up here and say, if you want a great family, got to have Jesus at the center. Got to make sure that Jesus is supreme. And like we all get that, we understand that, but we find it very difficult to come up with tangible ways to demonstrate it. Like to really show that Jesus is at the center and that Jesus has the total domination of our life, of our family, our marriage, our home. And we need some help because sometimes we come up empty there. And so what Paul does here in Colossians chapter 3 is just like in the other areas we've studied. He gives us some practical points of application. He just sort of lays it out. Now, he doesn't outline every little detail, every little circumstance or situation that we might find ourselves in. But he does give us a starting point. He gives us some general principles. And today we're just going to call them rules. He gives us some rules to taking our family life from good to great to colossal. And so if you found your place there in Colossians chapter 3, we'll begin in verse 18. And now I'm going to give you the 4 rules of the colossal house. Colossians chapter 3, verse 18. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. Now, if you've listened to my preaching at any length of time whatsoever, you know I'm like huge on sermon outlines. Man, if I can give you 4 points and a good illustration, that's an awesome message. And I love it when we come to a text like this where the writer just seems to outline it for us. Bam, just 1 point right after the other. Now, I have this great temptation this morning to alliterate the heck out of it, But there's no need. Because what Paul does is he gives us some very clear, very straightforward rules of the colossal. I don't even need to mess with it. Just say what he said, and that's enough this morning. And now these are in no particular order. I said there's 4 of them. No particular order. They're not in order of prominence, like one's more important than the other. They're all important. But it just so happens, unfortunately for you ladies, he starts out with a rule that applies specifically to you. And rule number 1 is wives, submit to your husbands. Oh, no, he didn't. Yes, he did. Like really, he did. He went there, all the way there. And he's pretty serious about it. See, here's the thing before we get too far into this. Not just with this rule, but with all 4 rules. Just like the ones that are in your house, they're rules. They're not suggestions. They are hard, fast rules. And Paul begins verse 18, wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting to the Lord or in the Lord. And now, I'll just be honest with you, this probably has to be one of the most controversial principles in the entire Bible in regards to the family dynamic, to marital order. And here's the reason why. I believe it's the most controversial principle found because, and therefore the most ignored, because it's probably one of the most misunderstood principles. You see, and I understand this. Ladies, when you hear words like, wives, submit to your husbands, like you can't help it. Those interpreting gears just switch on. And what many of you hear is, wives, you do whatever your husband says to do. Doesn't matter how you feel about it and what you think, you just do it. Wives, you surrender your voice, surrender your feelings, you surrender your opinions and your thoughts, and you answer yes, sir, no, sir, to everything he says. And that's what Paul's telling you to do. But it's not. It's nowhere even near that. That's not even in the same universe. There is nothing here to suggest at all that anyone should be a doormat. That anyone has to surrender her voice or her opinion or her thoughts and her suggestions. Nothing here. And there's definitely no evidence whatsoever, wives, that you have to tolerate abuse or be taken advantage of. That's not what Paul's saying. That's not what it means to submit to your husband. And in fact, this particular word and what Paul's saying here goes to reinforce the very reason God created women in the first place. You take it all the way back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, and God says about Adam, it's not good for man to be alone. So I will create a helper suitable for him. You see, wives were not created to be the slaves and servants of their husbands, nor were they created to usurp the God-given authority and responsibility of their husband, but rather to help him, to strengthen him, to encourage and support him, to work with him. That's what it means to submit. It's a very interesting word when you really take the time to look into it and to study and take it for what it's worth. Instead of meaning something that conjures up thoughts in our mind and pictures that resemble the rear-naked chokehold, the word submit really, it's somewhat of a military term. And it describes soldiers who line up in formation under the leadership of their authority. In a non-military sense, it would describe the attitude or the actions of someone who is yielding to or cooperating with someone else. That's what Paul's calling the ladies to do, to yield, to cooperate with their husbands. I think of it in terms of like driving, like rules of the road. You know, in most cases, if you want to make a turn and you're turning into or with oncoming traffic, you have to do what? Unless you have like a green arrow. You have to yield. Because they in that circumstance have the right of way. And it's not because that they're better than you. It's not because the oncoming traffic is more dominant and their cars are so much better. It's not because you don't have the right to turn. It's simply because in that situation, that is the rule. And the rule is there to lessen confusion. The rule is there to establish order. And it's there to help avoid catastrophe. It's the same way in the home. These rules are there to establish order, to lessen confusion, and to hopefully avoid catastrophe or disaster in the home. But notice that Paul adds to this phrase, wives, submit to your husbands, and then he adds to it, as is fitting to or in the Lord. As is fitting to or in the Lord. That word fitting means as is due him or as he deserves. You see, I have a lot of ladies who talk to me and say, and they resist, they push against this idea of yielding and submitting and respecting their husbands because they say, he don't deserve it. How can I respect somebody? He's not worthy of respect. Listen, you may be absolutely right. You may have well just married the biggest jerk on the planet. I mean, seriously, he may not deserve it. And it may be very difficult to respect someone who is not really worthy of respect. But here's the thing. Here's where Paul comes in and speaks to this very clearly. Paul is not saying that's why you should do it, because he's worthy of it. In fact, he calls for wives to submit, to yield to their husbands, not because the husband deserves it, but because Jesus does. And Jesus demands it. Jesus is worthy of your respect. Jesus is worthy of your honor and your submission. And if He is supreme in your life, then one way for you to honor and yield and surrender to Him is to submit and respect your husband. He deserves that. Number 2, husbands, love your wives. Husbands, love your wives. Do not be harsh with them. So guys, I'm going to let the ladies have a break for a minute. It's your turn. I just step up to the plate, right? Take a licking. Here's what I noticed when I began to read this. It just sort of jumped off the page at me, something almost as if I had never seen it before. The first thing that really spoke to me was not merely what Paul said, but what he didn't say. He did not say, husbands, lead your wife. He said, love her. Love her. Well, aren't husbands supposed to be the head of the house? Aren't husbands supposed to lead? Absolutely. I support that role. I believe the Bible supports that role. Husbands should lead. Husbands are the priest of the home. They're the head of the house. I mean, Paul is very clear about that. In Ephesians chapter 5, he echoes these very same rules. He goes into a little more depth in some of them. And he's very clear about the husband's role as the head of the house in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22 and 23, where he says, again, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. So his position is very clear. However, again in Ephesians, when Paul addresses the responsibility of the husband to the wife, look at what he says in verse 25. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave Himself up for her. So there's no doubt, there's no debate on whether or not the husband is the head. But when it comes to his responsibility, the command that we find in Ephesians and in Colossians is not that he should lead, but how he should lead. With love. What Paul is saying, guys, is lead like Jesus led. Think about that. Did he lead? Did he convince others to follow him? By being dictatorial, just demanding that everybody do things his way? Did he lead others by demeaning them, breaking their spirit until they yielded to his authority? No. He loved people. He loved them. And because of his love, he was able to lead. But take that a step further, because you'll notice that Paul, he draws our attention to the fact that Jesus' leadership, which was tied to his love, was something that he didn't just feel. Because I know that there may be some guys in here thinking, well, I got this, man. I love my wife. I really do. I love my wife with all my heart. So, where am I missing it? Jesus' leadership, tied to his love, wasn't something that he merely felt. Something that he showed. Something that he expressed through service. That's why Paul said, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. He served her. You see, guys, if you'll come to grips with this and accept this as the truth that it is, it'll revolutionize the way you love and lead your wife. You might remember that Jesus also said in Luke chapter 22, verse 26, that the leader, the one who wants to be the leader among you, must become the servant of all. You will not be a successful leader until you're an effective servant. Remember that, guys. Remember that. And Paul specifically mentioned how Christ gave himself up for the church that he loved. Let me ask you something, husbands. Wanna-be husbands. What part of yourself, what part of your life, what part of your desires, your hobbies, your career, what is it? What are you giving up in order to actively and purposely love your wife and effectively lead her? Because I'm telling you right now, if you're not serving, if you're not giving up something, you're not loving nor leading her. The rule is, husbands, love your wife. But here, don't stop there, because just like with the wives, he adds a little extra responsibility here. Not just love your wives, but he says, don't be harsh with them. Don't be harsh with them. It's a call to meekness. Meekness, to harness the harshness. You see, guys, I know to the modern man, we're thinking, I ain't doing that. Because we interpret meekness as weakness. We see the idea of being meek and gentle and sensitive, you know. The most unappealing virtue and characteristic that anyone could even suggest. Because from a young age, guys, I know, I was there. We're taught to be stern. We're taught to stand up. You know, assert ourselves, because that's the way you get things done. That's the way you get people to do things your way. But you see, what the Bible teaches us is so counter to what the culture and even what our own nature tries to teach us. The Bible says that if we're serious about following Jesus' example, if we're serious about loving and leading our wives the way Christ does the church, then we have to harness the harshness. We have to realize that one of the noblest characteristics found in the Bible is meekness. And those leaders who were most successful possessed it. Husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Rule number 3. Children, obey your parents. But why? Well, because I said so. And the Bible backs me up on it. Right? All the parents, amen. Yeah. But you don't understand. You know, my, just like, oh, stop your whining. Like, let's just do it. Rule number 4. All right. Seriously, we can spend some time on this one. There are some questions. Why would I want to do this? You know, whether I'm a young child or in high school, in college, still living at home, whatever, this applies. Verse 20, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases, this pleases the Lord. And when you really take a close look and an honest look at it, the reasoning behind this is much like the other rules. Say, just like the one for the wives. Wives, submit to your husbands. You know, not because he deserves it so much, because Jesus does. Jesus deserves the honor. Jesus deserves the respect. Paul says here that children, we're to obey parents not only because they are the parents and they're in a position of authority, but more so because it pleases God. I mean, you want a surefire way to know that you're living a life that pleases God, at least in one area? Then simply obey your parents. Do what they ask you to do. It's not a matter of I know they're not always right. Like, they don't make the right calls in every situation. And I know moms and dads are not always fair, but it's not a matter of rightness. It's not a matter of fairness. It's a matter of obedience. Obedience to God and pleasing Him with your life. But when you step back from it, there are some very practical reasons why children of any age should take this truth to heart and get serious about showing obedience to God by showing obedience to their parents. And one is simply because whether you're 5 or you're 25, you don't know it all. Like, I know that comes as a shock to you. Your mom and dad's been telling you for years, but it's the truth. You don't know it all. You haven't gotten it all figured out. Parents have a distinct advantage over children in the area of experience and wisdom. Like, they've actually been around the block a few times. Learn some lessons the really hard way, and you would be wise to learn them from them. Children, obey your parents. But see, the word obey here, just to go a little further with it, this word refers to someone who's in the position of a porter or like a gatekeeper. And see, their job is to be attentive, to listen for someone who might come to the door. And at the knock of the door, the gatekeeper will come, the bellman, he will come, and he will listen at the door to see who it is and answer the door and, let that person in and receive that person. And Paul is instructing children, do the same in respect to your parents. Be attentive. Listen. Pay attention. Because what they have to say and what they have to teach you is really important. Could change your life. Could really help you avoid a lot of hardship. So like that doorman, listen for them. And when you hear words of truth and wisdom, whether you actually agree with it in a moment or think it's fair or not, receive it. Receive it as truth. Just like someone will receive a guest into their home. To add to that, again, like I said in Ephesians, Paul sort of takes these same principles and expounds on them a little bit. And you might notice if you read in Ephesians chapter 5, the end of the chapter, and it follows right into chapter 6. In verse 2 of Ephesians chapter 6, Paul says, not only does it please God when children obey their parents, but he says, listen, it'll also add life to your years to your life. Like, if you want a surefire way of not dying young, listen to what mom and dad says, because then they won't kill you, right? It'll add life. It'll add life. So it's something that we should take serious. Rules of the Colossal family. Ways that we can show that Jesus has the supremacy in our home. Wives submit to their husbands. Husbands love their wives. Children obey their parents. And then number 4 here, parents build up your children. Parents build up your children. Look at, Paul says it a little differently in verse 21. He says, fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. Obviously he mentions and he addresses fathers specifically. And I don't believe that's because he's just giving moms a pass. I believe there's a very specific reason why he addresses fathers directly. And it's simply this. Let's just be honest and real. Dads, we have the tendency to be a little harsher. Don't we? We have the tendency to show a little less restraint than maybe mom would in the same situation. And that isn't technically universal, but it's typical. It's typical. It's probably why when, both of my girls, they'll test Jessica. They'll try to push the limits with her. And in a situation where she might have to resort to a spanking, like really get serious with them, I, in the same situation, may only just I have to snap my fingers, like that. Like, I'm serious. Give you a good look. Or speak sternly, and they'll fall in line. Because dads, we just have a tendency to be a little more stern, a little more harsh. But the warning here, I want you to pay attention to the warning. The warning here is against not discipline, not instruction, against embittering, against discouraging children. And that word embitter in other translations, you might have a different one than I do this morning. It might say there to anger them, don't provoke them, don't exasperate them. Further understandings are to annoy them or to disturb and agitate, like to get on their nerves or under their skin. And hey, listen, I'm a parent, I get this. You might be sitting here thinking right now, I don't care if I make them mad or not. Like, I'll get on their nerves if I want to. I'll get under their skin. It's my house. Listen. Take it for what it's worth. You do with it what you want to. But with that kind of attitude, what you're going to end up with is not an obedient and respectful child, but a resentful child, one who shuts you out. And then along about mid-teenage years, you're going to come crying to me because you have no relationship with your child. And you want to know why? Because you've done exactly you've done exactly what the Bible said don't do. You've broken the rules. This word, to embitter, it really stood out to me as I dug deeper into this text. And what stood out to me so much was the graphic definition of embitter means to needle them. To needle that child. To sort of, like we might say down here in the South, to henpeck them. Maybe you had a parent like this. You might be a parent like this, or know one, who's just constantly on a child's case about every little thing. Just constantly needling, constantly criticizing, constantly nitpicking, constantly discouraging, constantly being overly and unreasonably disciplining them. It's needling. It's doing it's not doing any benefit to them. It's actually breaking the spirit of the child. It's leading him or her to believe and to think that they can't do anything right. And what happens when they think they can't do anything right? They don't try. They cast off restraint. Well, if I can't do anything right, if I can't ever get any attention for doing the right thing, well, why even bother? And see, the very behavior that you as a parent were trying to correct or to avoid ends up worsening. And by needling them, you enhance the chance of their rebellion. Listen, I'm all for discipline. Discipline is absolutely biblical. I have no problems with busting that rear. I mean, if it needs it, man, bam, let them have it. No one has ever been killed by a reasonable and just spanking. Sometimes it just has to be. But we don't need to needle them. We don't need to be overly critical of our children. In fact, we need to remember that Psalm 127 reminds us that our children are a blessing, a reward, a responsibility and gift from God our Father. And He calls for us to build them up, not tear them down. They're His before they're ours. Let's take care of them with great care and responsibility. So, this is how we take steps toward building a colossal family. A family where it's evident that Christ has the supremacy, where He is at the center and is in control. And Paul simply told us, you want a colossal family? You want to go from good to great to colossal? Then everybody, not just the kids, not just mom, not just dad, everybody has to go by the rules. Wives, submit your husbands as is fitting to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church. And don't be harsh. Children, obey your parents, because that obedience is not only what's expected, but it pleases God. And then parents, be sure that you take every opportunity to build up, not tear down your children.